don't have a lot.
Great.
I don't have a lot to say in terms of being the advisor. I remember that Emily interacted with me in Honors 390, which is the preparatory course for this. And at that point, she just described the project that she had in mind, that she had dreamed of basically since you set foot at Western. And so she and I were, initially working out who she might ask to advise with. And it's been kind of an odd few years. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but finding an advisor proved to be challenging, although she did succeed. And then that person left.
Yeah, I talked about that.
And then she came to me and said, well, can you see me through to the end? And so I, agreed to pick up her project. In terms of the work that Emily and I did together, I basically reassured Emily that if this didn't work out the way that it actually did, what was she gonna do? And so I basically troubleshooted, all of the plan B, C, D, E, F, and G's. But luckily, Emily's plan A seems to have panned out. And so once that started rolling, off she went, and she basically, sent me some updates in terms of how she was doing. And I'm as excited, I think, as everyone is to see, her presentation and how it all worked out. So without further ado, turn it over to Emily.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming in person and online. Great turnout, very exciting. So yeah, thank you for coming to my presentation of my Capstone podcast series, The Vampire Tapes. So here's what you can expect from this presentation. These are all the things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about who I am and how we got here, the project conception, how I found the vampires, how I interviewed them, and then we're going to talk about the interviews themselves, the reception to the series, and we'll have some time at the end for questions. And if you notice the little colored asterisks at the side, it's because the slides are color coded based on theme so that you know how close we are to the end. So who am I? My name is Emily Bishop. I'm a journalism major with minors in psychology, religion and culture, and honors interdisciplinary studies. My hometown is Wichita, Kansas. My blood type is O positive, and I'm a Taurus. So you know a little bit about me. So how did we get here? So winter quarter of 2019, which was my freshman year, I wrote an essay in my Honors 104 class comparing Frankenstein and Interview with the Vampire. Both are novels with the framing device of a story being told to someone. And my basic argument was that Frankenstein doesn't really do anything with this framing. You can remove that framing device and have basically the exact same story. In fact, most adaptations do remove that framing device. But with Interview with the Vampire, it's an integral part of the narrative. You can't remove it, it would destroy the story. And you also have the benefit of it's a story being told to someone who serves as a stand-in for the audience. So the boy that is doing the interviewing, Daniel Malloy, is able to serve as a stand-in and ask the questions that we might ask Louis, the titular vampire, if we were in that situation. And then the next quarter, spring quarter of my freshman year in English 101, we did this big poster research project, and I did mine looking at the vampire as an archetype in movie and television, starting in the 20th century into the 21st, and looking at how the character has changed from always being like a very flat villain to becoming a more well-rounded and sympathetic protagonist. And then I went, wouldn't it be really funny if every time I have an assignment with an open prompt and I don't know what to do for it, I just made it about vampires? So that's what I did. Spring quarter of 2020, I took an arts reporting seminar here in Honors, and I ended up doing a review of Interview with the Vampire and a review of The Lost Boys for that class. Winter 2021, I took editing, and our final for that class was to do like a 6-page magazine spread around an article that we found online. And the article that I found was one talking about why vampires in movie and TV shows are so sexy. So that was my final for that class. And then since fall of 2021, I've been working on my capstone. So full disclosure, this project is cursed.
Nice.
What do I mean by that? You know, all these projects that I just listed off for these classes, none of those professors are at Western anymore. So Honors 104 professor, not at Western. English 101, not at Western. Honors 350, not currently at Western. Journalism 309, not at Western. As Professor Gold was saying, I've gotten some troubles with advisors. The first professor I asked to be my advisor said no, because he was about to go on sabbatical. The second professor I asked to be my advisor said no, because she was about to go on sabbatical. The third professor I asked to be my advisor was my advisor for 1 quarter before he left Western. And then in December 2021, Anne Rice died. If you don't know who Anne Rice is, she's an author best known for her book series, The Vampire Chronicles, the first book of which is Interview with the Vampire. And a lot of the aesthetic and design choices of this project are very clearly inspired by her work. The working title of this project up until like March or April was Interviews with the Vampires, a very obvious homage to the Anne Rice book. So I'm not saying that this project is responsible for her death, but that is a hell of a coincidence. So thank you, Professor Goldman, for taking on the job of advising this project, even though it is cursed. So now we can talk about the project itself. So anytime I start working on projects like this, I like to think of like, what do I want to get out of it? What do I want people that listen or watch or read to get out of it? So when I sat down fall quarter and made a list of all the things that I needed to do to make this project a real thing, I came up with this goal and then the main focus of the interviews. So this was like the very first thing I wrote for this project. The goal of this project is to interview individuals who claim they are real life vampires. The main focus of the interviews will be on how the individual came to the conclusion that they are a vampire and how that affects their day-to-day life, as well as interpersonal relationships. And I think I was successful in this goal. I interviewed individuals who claim to be real life vampires, and the interviews focused on how they came to the conclusion, how it affects their day-to-day life, and interpersonal relationships. So fantastic, goal achieved. My other goal was that I wanted 5 interviews. That was my goal. I felt that I needed to have at least 3 for this to be a successful thing. And if I just got like a ton of responses from people, my cutoff for interviews would be 7. So my goal was 5, and I did 5 interviews. Perfect. Like I said, I've been working on this project all year. So what have I been doing? Fall quarter, I did a lot of prep work for this project. I figured out the logistics of recording and hosting the podcast and the interviews. I laid the bones of the website for the project. I distributed a survey asking people to identify traits that they thought were necessary for a character in fiction to be considered a vampire. And then I used those responses to kind of mold some of the questions I asked. And then I finalized my interview questions. Winter quarter, I did the interviews. I made a call to action, I found my sources, and I interviewed them. And then spring quarter, editing and final touches on the project. I edited the interviews, I published them online, and now I'm doing my capstone presentation. This is the last piece of work for this project. So how did I find the vampires? Anytime I talk to people about this project, the first thing they ask is, Emily, how did you find the vampires? Reddit, email, and DMs, in that order. So on Reddit, on the r/realvampire subreddit, which is a real subreddit you can check out, you can look at it yourself, I posted a call to action. The TLDR is that I basically introduced myself, here's who I am, this is this project I'm working on, this is what it's going to be about. If you're interested in being interviewed, fill out this form, and if you have any questions, email me. And full disclosure, when I got started, I thought that I would only have to make this Reddit post and I would get all these replies and that would be it. I'd have my sources. The vampire community is very insular. And like a lot of people in life, don't like talking to reporters. I got a comment from a mod on the subreddit, basically warning people to be wary of interviews because you never know how your words are going to be taken out of context or misconstrued. And I won't lie, this comment hurt my feelings a little, but I understand it, I get it. So yeah, I didn't get as many responses as I thought I was going to, but I did get 3 responses. And like I said at the beginning, 3 I felt was the minimum that I needed for this project to work. So I got my 3 responses, fantastic. I can get rolling, I'm lining up interviews and emailing people. Everything else after this is just cherry on top. And then Brianna pulled out of the interview. Isaac, Rose, and Brianna were my 3 respondents, and Brianna decided that she did not want to be interviewed. She had concerns about anonymity. She had concerns about being taken as like a voice for the community. So she decided to pull out, which is totally fine. I wouldn't want to interview someone that was not comfortable being interviewed, especially for a project like this. However, around the same time that Brianna decided she didn't want to participate anymore, Isaac stopped replying to my emails, and Rose and I scheduled an interview, and then she didn't show up. And then she didn't reply to my emails. So I hit this point in winter quarter I like to call the spiral. I was spiraling, and I sent many frantic emails to Goldwyn, and I was like, this is such a dumb project. Why did I think this would work? This is never going to be successful. I should just quit and like do something else altogether. But then Isaac started replying to my emails. Rose apologized. She had a work thing come up, and that's why she forgot about the interview. And we moved ahead, and I interviewed Isaac and I interviewed Rose, and everything worked out. And I was like, I have 2 interviews. I need at least 1 more. I need to see this thing through to the end. I need to finish what I set out to do. But I felt that Reddit had yielded all of the responses that it was going to. So I needed to search elsewhere. So I started emailing people. If you look online, you can find all kinds of vampire websites. You really just have to look. You can find blogs and resource sites. You can find a lot of like Facebook groups or sites for covens or clans, which if you're like, what's that? We talk about it in the vampire tapes. So listen to the episodes. But the short of it is that it's like groups of vampires, usually geographically based. So you'll have like Vampire Coven of Seattle, Vampire Coven of Vancouver. So I went to these sites and scoured for contact information. And if there was an email, I emailed them. I sent so many emails, like any website that was like tangentially connected to vampirism, I emailed saying like, here's who I am, I'm working on this project. Do you have anyone that would be interested in being interviewed? Ghosted. To this day, I have not gotten a single reply from any of those emails I sent. That's depressing. But I still needed at least 1 more source, and ideally 3. So I started DMing strangers online because the line between stalking and journalism is a thin one. So I went on social media sites, primarily Tumblr, but also Twitter and Instagram. And at this point, I've done all this research into the vampire community. So I just start looking up terms that I know are related to people that consider themselves vampires. And I looked for people that had these words in their bios, things like real vamp or side vamp or sanguinarian, which are all terms that we define in the vampire tape. So you should go and listen to that. But I just DM'd these people, introducing who I was, what this project was, and asking if they would be okay doing an interview. And this yielded 2 responses. Lex and Damon both said that they would be willing to sit down and do an interview with me. So success, DMing strangers online worked. So I interviewed Lex, that was my 3rd interview. I interviewed Damon, that was my 4th one. And I figured that was probably it. But part of me was like, oh, like I really wanted 5. The goal was 5, but you know, I should just be grateful I got 4. But in this time that I was just like DMing strangers online and checking these websites, I came across Michelle Belanger, who is an author, musician, paranormal investigator, and psychic vampire. And Michelle has like been on CNN headline news and done book tours and is like a real like public person. But on their website, there's one of those forms that you can fill out for contact information, for interviews, for statements, and all of that. So I filled it out kind of on a whim, not expecting a response because I am a small fish in the pond. But Michelle got back to me and we did an interview, and that was my 5th interview, and it's the longest one. And I got my 5 interviews. Everyone that I spoke to for this project was really cool, and I'm so grateful that they took time out of their day to sit down and chat with me. But I had my 5 sources, my 5 interviews, and I was good to go. So setting up the interviews. Every person I spoke to, I had to fill out a form that asked for their email, their name, if they wanted to remain anonymous or not, a short disclaimer basically saying, I understand that the purpose of this interview is that the audio is going to be recorded and distributed as a podcast, and I'm okay with that. And then the option for them to write a short bio about themselves so that I could tailor my questions specifically for each interviewee. I conducted the interviews over Zencastr, which is an online video calling site. Zencastr is great because it records the audio at a pretty high quality. It records the audio tracks as separate, so it makes editing easier. We did run into a few technological problems, but it's unsure if that was like human error or a problem with the site itself. Overall, it was really good though, and this project would not have been able to be a thing without the ability to video call for these interviews. My first interview I did on January 27th, which was about 3 weeks in the winter quarter. And my last interview was March 13th, which was the Sunday before winter finals week. So I quite literally spent the entirety of winter quarter lining up and conducting interviews for this project. That was my entire winter quarter. So the tapes, now we get to talk about the tapes themselves. Why did I format these as tapes? Because I thought it was fun and cute. It's really as simple as that. I thought it was like a fun little retro thing to do with it. Also, as I said earlier, a lot of the aesthetics and design aspects of this project are very clearly inspired by Interview with the Vampire, and in both the book and film adaptation of that, the boy doing the interviewing, Daniel, is doing so on like a cassette recorder. He has a bag of tapes he's taking out and recording Louis' life story. So I thought that would also be a fun little nod to that. But I also just thought that was like a cute little retro way to do it. So all of the tapes have the same formatting. They all start with an intro where I introduce myself and whoever it is we're talking to, that tape. Then you have the framing device of a cassette, being a cassette tape going into the recorder and recording. Then you have the interview itself, and then it ends with that framing device, the cassette running and stopping recording. And then an outro where I'm like, thanks for listening, there are 5 tapes, check out our website. Initially, my plan was to drop all the tapes at once. For the bulk of the time working on this project, I figured I would release them all like this morning, the morning of my presentation, or maybe the night before, or a few days at most. And I opted not to do that. I know we kind of live in this era of like binge consuming media. I don't like to do that personally. I like to pace myself. So I decided to do a weekly release instead. The other benefit of doing a weekly release was that I had to pace myself with the work. I could not leave it all for the last second to edit and put together. If you're releasing an episode every week, you have to work on an episode every week. So it made it so the workload was a lot lighter and a lot easier to manage, and therefore not really stressful. I made a trailer for the series, and I released it April 15th in an attempt to drum up some internet hype. So we're gonna go ahead and watch that little.
Vampire. If you start to the part that says like just walk around like it's next kind of vampire community and someone who feels compulsion in nature, but
What is it like being a vampire? I made that, put it on every social media I have on April 15th. And then on April 25th was when what is technically the first tape dropped, which is my tape. It's a tape 0, which is basically a condensed version of this presentation. I introduce myself, talk about how this project came to be and what you can expect from it. May just so happened to be a month with 5 Mondays. So every Monday in May at 9 a.m., there is a new tape available to listen. I released them in the order that I conducted the interviews. And for some reason, with the exception of Isaac's, who's a little shorter, they just get longer as it progresses. I'm not sure why that is. I don't know if it's just luck of the draw and the people that I spoke to, like progressively were just people that were more talkative and had more to say, and therefore the interviews were longer, or if it's because as time went on, I became more comfortable with this setup and doing the interviews. So I was better at, I don't know, picking up follow-up questions or something. But that's how it works out. They were, like I said, they were released in the order I did them, but the way that they're formatted and the way that I did the interviews, you can listen to them in any order. You don't have to listen to them in this order. And this release schedule is Mondays at 9 a.m. because I wanted the last tape to be released a week before I gave this presentation, and I knew I would be giving it on a Monday. So now we can talk about reception to the project. That was another reason that I wanted to do a weekly release, so that for this presentation, I could talk about feedback. There has been some written feedback to this series, which is really cool. Lex, who was the third person I interviewed, received this anonymous message and replied. So the top square is the message that he got from an anonymous user, and the bottom is his reply. So someone anonymously messaged him. I just wanted to say it was incredible to hear you speak on the Vampire Tapes podcast from @Toasty Beverage. That is my social media handle. Assuming there isn't another sanguinarian Lex, I followed you for years now since my awakening, and you've always been such a comforting, helpful presence. Hearing your voice as a real person really makes me feel less alone in the world. Thank you for continuing to answer questions and being a voice for the community. And then Lex replied saying, I'm really glad you enjoyed it so much. It was me, by the way. I was a little terrified to share it on my blog since I've never shared my voice or face or any of it TBH, but I'll have to add the link now. I had a really wonderful time. Emily was wonderful to talk to, and I'd happily do more if I could. It is wonderful to make people feel a little less alone. That's exactly why I started posting here in the first place. I hope you have a really wonderful day. Your comment made mine. And it made mine as well, because that's just such a cool thing, I think, that someone listened to something that I put together and it meant enough to them that they reached out to someone that I interviewed to tell them how much it meant to them. Like that's really cool. And I also got my own bit of written feedback. I got an anonymous message. I don't know if it's from the same person that messaged Lex or from someone else, but someone messaged me saying, Emily, I'm a sanguinarian that lives in Bellingham, Washington, right next door to Western. So local vampire, that's very cool. I wanted to tell you, I appreciate your interest in the real vampire community, and I've had a lot of fun listening to your episodes every week. So much of the community is strictly on blogs where we never hear any voices or see any faces. Hearing the voices of like-minded people has been pretty amazing. Thank you for your work. I look forward to the next episode. So this is a really sweet message to get halfway through the series. I know, like, I personally, when I'm working on stuff like this, there's always like that voice in the back of your head that's like, does this even matter? Is anyone even going to like look at this thing and have it mean anything? So to get a message that someone found my series and listened to it and it meant something to them is like incredibly cool and one of the highlights of this whole thing. And that's just incredible. And I'm really grateful for that. So now we can talk about the more statistical reception to the project. So Anchor FM, which is the hosting site for the podcast, gives really great insight into your audience, as does YouTube. And then Wix, which is the host for the project's website, shows general site traffic stuff. So we're gonna go ahead and take a look at those. Can people online see the that we've switched to a new page? Does that work? So this is the traffic overview from the last 90 days from Wix. There have been 17 site sessions with 14 unique visitors, and on average, people spend about 4.5 minutes on the site, and everyone is getting there directly. So they are typing in the link. You'll notice these little spikes in visitation, and they pretty directly correlate with the release of a new tape, usually the day of or the day after a new tape was released. There would be an increase in site traffic. You can see that reflected here with Monday, the day that the tapes are released, having slightly less traffic than Tuesday, the day following. Most people are checking out the site on mobile, although there are some desktop users, and they are all unique visitors. And they're all in the US, except for one person who's checking out the website in India. So that is fun. Sorry, I have like the little screen sharing thing. Channel analytics on YouTube. There's a YouTube page for the channel. Sorry, yeah, people can see the thing. The reason there's a YouTube channel is because I wanted people that maybe didn't have Spotify to still be able to listen to the series. And I figured the easiest way to do that would be to upload them as videos onto YouTube. Full disclosure, no one is listening to the series on YouTube. You might see these little spikes of people listening. That is a lie. That is me going in and clicking on the videos and adding it to a playlist. And even though I am on the page for like 2 seconds, YouTube still counts that as a view. So no one is listening to this series on YouTube, but you have the option to. So there's that. Anchor FM, I think, has the best and coolest demographic information on the series. So this project has 70 all-time plays with 11 plays per episodes, and my average audience size is 13. And I am not making a profit because this is not a monetized series. So you might see that and be like, that's pretty cool. And not to guilt trip my friends and family, but I have more than 13 friends and family. Why is that number not higher? I've been pimping out this series since week 1. Not to guilt shame my nearest and dearest, but come on, guys. The podcast, this is a graph of the performance. Like with the Wix site, you'll notice there's a trend between when an episode drops and when people are listening. So there's that. Episode rankings are exactly what I expected. It's progressively less with each episode, which makes sense because if you find the series and you're like, I'm going to listen to this, you're going to listen to the first episode and you might not come back to listen to the second one. So I am not at all surprised that Roses, being the first tape, is the most popular. Tape 0 slightly below that because like not everyone's going to listen to tape 0. It's an introduction or prologue. And then Lex, Damon, and Isaac being in the middle because those are the middle episodes, and Michelle's being the lowest as the last one. So not at all surprised by the episode rankings. The audience information, I think, is the coolest part of this. Change that to all time. So most people are listening on Spotify, although some people are listening on Anchor, and predominantly people are listening on their mobile devices, although some people are listening on web. I think the coolest information is this geographical information, because I have some international listeners and I don't know people in those places. Like I don't, one of the people I spoke to was from Canada. So like that might be him and like his friends or whatever, but like, I don't know anyone in Brazil or Australia or India. I don't know anyone in the UK or the Philippines. So those are people that have just found this series organically and decided to give it a listen. Similarly, with the United States demographic stuff, like it makes sense that Washington is up there. I go to school here and I'm from Kansas, but like, I don't know anyone in Virginia or Michigan. So again, people are just finding this series and listening to it, and that's really cool. Gender breakdown. This has been, I check these demographics pretty frequently. So currently, 58% of my listeners are male and 39% are female. That is new. For the bulk of the time this series has been out, it's been almost exactly 50-50, only moving like 2 to 3%. And I now have a non-binary listener, and that's new as of last night, because when I checked this information last night, that was not there. So shout out to them. And then the age breakdown stuff is also kind of surprising to me, that my biggest age listening demographic is people 23 to 27, followed by people 28 to 34. I would not have guessed that. I would have guessed it was 18 to 22, just because that's the age range that I'm in. So by default, a lot of my friends are in that age range, although not all of them. And then I would have assumed that the 45 to 59 would have been the next highest, because that's the age range of like my parents and a lot of my aunts and uncles. So family listening in. But I just think it's cool that I have listeners from all age groups. So wide appeal to the series. So yeah, that is all of that. That's a look into the insights of the project. So if you've been watching this and you're like, wow, the Vampire Tape sounds like a really cool series. Like, how can I listen to that? You can find us on Spotify at the Vampire Tapes. And similarly, you could be our first listener on YouTube at the Vampire Tapes. You can also listen on the project's website. There's also like additional information there and transcripts of all the episodes. And that is tinyurl.com/Vampire Tapes. So that was my presentation.
Oh.